Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. I am Greg, here today with my little girl, Jameson, who is not going to look at the camera because that's not what she does. There she goes. She will be one of the prompts for this book tag that I wanted to do today. She won't last the whole video. In fact, it looks like she already wants down. There she goes. So this is the Meet the BookTuber Tag. I saw a couple of people do this in the month of January and wanted to do it myself. I never did the BookTube newbie tag, so I figured this would be a fun thing to do. A lot of subscribers have come on to my channel in the last 2 months, so I figured this is also a nice, fun way to say, hi, how are you? This is me. So it's basically just a tag about myself. Kind of wanted to do it, so let's dive in. This was done by What Victoria Read. I will link her video down below. I was not tagged in it, but the one video of it that I saw first was from Brian at Bookish. I'll put his video down below as well because that's the one that inspired me to do it. So let's jump in. The first prompt is, please give your name, age, and location. My name is Greg. I am 37 years old, and I live in Missoula, Montana. I am originally from Long Island in New York. I spent most of my life living in or around major metropolitan cities, New York City or Chicago or San Francisco. I went to high school in San Francisco, actually. So a lot of people are surprised that I ended up living in a rural area in Montana, but it's kind of the change I was looking for. I think because I lived in and around big cities for a long time, I was ready for a different life. And when I go back to big cities now, I always immediately feel stressed out. So there you go. Prompt number 2. Do you have any siblings? And if so, where do you come in the sibling order? I have 2 sisters, and I am the middle child. And I am the consummate middle child. I very much had middle child syndrome growing up and still struggle with it to this day. One of my father's coworkers at one point was having a 3rd child and asked me about middle child syndrome, and I said, it's real. And he said, well, how can I avoid it? And I said, well, I think my problem always was, as a middle child, you don't have any of the responsibility or trust that the older child has, but you also don't have any of the freedom that the younger child has. And that was the struggle for me. So if you can find a balance for that, you'll be fine. And that's still the way I think about it now, because even now, my older sister is still the trusted child among my parents. She is the one that they talk to whenever there's something going on. She's frequently brought in for advice, which, you know, is partially just her because she's really smart and good at these things. But you know, how much of it is birth order, how much of it is her, I don't know. So, but I will also say, having grown up with sisters, this isn't part of the question, but I think it's something that really informed who I am, because my sisters are my best friends, always have been. And I think having 2 sisters informed who I am because I saw the way that the world treated them compared to the way the world treated me, a white male. And I never thought it was fair. I had many people at different points tell me I must live like a king because I was the only son, and I remember just thinking, but why? So it is what it is. By the way, I apologize for this. There's a reflection. Our neighbor has these little spangly things hanging from a tree, and at certain points of the day, they just hit the wall. So if it looks like Tinkerbell is hanging out, nothing I can do about it. Question number 3. What do you do for work or university? I've had a very interesting, weird career path. So when I graduated from high school, I did not want to go to college, figured I never would. I worked at Borders for a while and then eventually realized I was never going to have enough money to move out on my own while I was working at Borders. So I went back to school. I went to community college, transferred to Columbia, couldn't afford Columbia. So I got an internship in publishing while at Columbia, turned that into a full-time job, and then eventually had to just drop out of school completely because even though the school promised to have a flexible schedule for people who had full-time jobs, I was unable to finish any of my graduation requirements and work full-time. So I worked in publishing, and then I ended up moving to Montana and leaving publishing completely. After I moved here, I worked for a radio station in town, managing their websites and doing editorial content and digital strategy, basically, helping them figure out how to grow their audience digitally and work on their social media strategy and things like that. I got promoted, which seemed like a great thing at the time, except a year later I was laid off, as happens. I ended up working in corporate recruiting, which is what I do today. I've been doing this for 3 years. I do a little bit of recruiting, but mostly I actually work on the client relationships and candidate relationships and things like that, just kind of managing their experience with it. And it's fine. It is what it is. It allows me to work from home, which is nice. And I can't really complain about that. It is what it is, but that's what I do. Will it be what I do forever? I don't know. But it's what I do right now. Prompt number 4, do you have any kids? I've mentioned many times on this channel, my husband and I have a foster son. Legally, cannot talk about him too much, which is fine because it's not, his life is not mine to share all over YouTube. I can't even share his name, but we do have a foster child. I can tell you he is 18 years old. He just turned 18 this month. He is supposed to have another year of school, but he has been working hard to try to graduate this year. And so far, he's on track to do it. So we'll see. I'm really proud of him for that. The kind of scary, weird thing that's up in the air is that, once he graduates, will it be a long-term relationship? I don't know. I hope it is. But yeah, so that's our path to having a kid. Hopefully it'll be long-term, but it is what it is. We'll have to wait and see on that part. And then the next prompt is, do you have any pets? Well, that's where Jameson comes in. And we also have Guinness, who is asleep on the couch over there. We had Guinness first. Guinness was actually my first dog. I grew up with cats. I was a cat person, but my husband is allergic to cats. So dogs were really our best option. We have Welsh Terriers, which are actually good for people who have allergies, even though my husband is not allergic to dogs because they have hair, not fur. But so they're both Welsh Terriers. We got Guinness first. We wanted the full experience of raising a dog from being a puppy. So we got him when he was only 6 weeks old. We were supposed to get him at 9 weeks old, but the breeder kind of dumped him on us early. And he'd fit in the palms of our hands at that time. And we raised him. He's a total teddy bear. We love him. And by the way, indulge me, since I can't talk about my kid legally, at least let me talk about my pets. And then we adopted Jamie from the Humane Society a year later. We got a text message from a friend who volunteers at the Humane Society saying, hey, a Welsh Terrier just showed up here. And we told her, well, we have our hands full with our puppy right now. We're not ready for another dog. And she responded by texting us a photo of Jameson, who at the time was known as Hattie Olga. That is her original name. And of course, we looked at the photo and just said, well, we have to go meet her. And which, of course, meant we adopted her. There's a long story there and I won't get into it, but turned out Jameson had a heart condition. The Humane Society managed to do a fundraiser to get her surgery to have it done. We did manage to keep the adoption through all of that. She also, a couple months later, was cleared to be spayed, and during that we found that she had cysts and polyps in her uterus, probably from overuse. She came from a breeding farm, and they probably just had her churning out litters of puppies. So she was just a couple of weeks away from a systemic infection, is what they told us, which would have killed her. So we refer to her as our miracle baby. She's come through a lot to be part of this family. Unfortunately, in November, she was diagnosed with another heart condition. She has an enlarged heart, so we have her on medication. We changed her diet. We try to make sure she gets a good solid walk every single day, and she will have another checkup in March or April, and hopefully all of that will be making some progress on that front, because she's going to be turning 10 this year. She's feisty, she's tough. If you hear barking or growling in any of my videos, odds are it's her. It's almost always Jameson. And prompt number 6 is, can you drive? Which is funny because yes, I can drive. But so my husband and I met when we were both living in New York City. And we were together about a year and a half before we were planning a weekend somewhere, and he started pulling up a rental car company so we could make it. And then all of a sudden he looks at me and says, wait a minute, can you drive? And I said, yeah, wait a minute, can you drive? Both of us can, but because we met in New York City where we took the subway or walked everywhere, we didn't really know if the other person could. But yes, both of us can drive, and it's a good thing because where we live, you wouldn't really be able to get around very well without a car at all. I'd love to be able to give it up, but the way the world works, it's kind of essential. Prompt number 7. What is or was your favorite subject at school? This may be surprising to some people because obviously I have a BookTube channel. It was not English. I was an English major in college when I went back, but I would not say that English was my favorite subject in school. I really in college when you talked about literature classes, I loved those. But I was never a huge fan of English classes because I'm not good at grammar, actually. And I can write and communicate fairly well, but only because I've been a reader my whole life. And when you are a reader your whole life, you will pick up vocabulary, and you have a really good idea of what sounds right in constructing a sentence and how things should flow. But if you asked me to diagram a sentence, I'd have no idea what to do. And I sometimes didn't do well in English because I was kind of a moody, stubborn kid. So if I was assigned a book that I didn't want to read, I wouldn't read it. So I would frequently get C's in English. So the class that I would actually say was my favorite would be history. I've always been a big fan of history. I think it's important to know where you come from and where the world comes from and different points of view and things like that. But I didn't typically read nonfiction or history until I was well into my 20s but I loved history classes all through school. And I was really bummed out because at a certain point in community college and then again in college, whenever I had an elective, I either used it on a literature class or a history class, and at a certain point I couldn't take any more history classes, and I thought that was really frustrating. So, history. Prompt number 8 is, what is your favorite color? The answer is purple, followed very closely by blue, which, I mean, they're kind of similar anyway, but yeah, purple, followed very closely by blue. Next one is, what is your favorite smell? I have a terrible sense of smell. I broke my nose when I was in 3rd grade, and we didn't actually know that my nose had been broken until I was somewhere in my early 20s and went to an ear, nose, throat doctor, and he told me I had broken my nose at some point, and I know exactly when it happened and what caused it. It was Little League, which is probably the butchest thing I have ever done. Actually, that's not true. I won $75 on a fishing trip, but that's a whole other story. Point is, because of that, I have always been prone to sinus infections. I don't have a great sense of smell. There are things that can get through, and one of them is Christmas trees. And I would say that's my favorite smell, for sure, which will surprise nobody. If you followed me through the holidays, you know I really get excited for Christmas. If I had to pick something else, I'd probably go with the smell of pancakes cooking, because that's my favorite food. So, probably not a surprise given that either. The next prompt is, what is your favorite book or your top 3? Now, I know a lot of people think that if you are a reader, you should be able to say what your favorite book is. I actually don't believe that, because my favorite book has changed over time. Anytime I've had one, it's only been temporary. And I could tell you what my favorite book right now is, and if you ask me again in a week, it could be different. So I don't actually have an answer to that question. And I think it's fine not to have an answer to that question. I can tell you who my favorite author is. It's E.M. Forster. But when it comes to an individual book, I don't really have an answer. I can tell you the 3 books that have meant the most to me in my life, so far at least. The first one is Matilda by Roald Dahl, which was my favorite book all through childhood and early adolescence. It is one of the foundational texts that I think made me the reader that I am today, and I give it a lot of credit for that, and will always love it. I think it's a really charming, clever book, and will always love it. The next one is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and I know this is not a book for everyone, but consider, and I know it's kind of a niche book because I frequently say I read it at the perfect time in my life, but I also realize that I am the perfect niche for this book because I am a white male. I was a white male teenager when I read it. Holden Caulfield, the main character, was a white male teenager. J.D. Salinger had once been a white male teenager, so I guess he wrote it with all of that in mind. So I can see how other people, even at the right age, wouldn't respond to it the way I did. But for me, it was just the perfect book at the perfect time, and I really identified with Holden and his worldview. I thought it perfectly captured how I felt about the world and the things that I thought to be true at the time. And I used to reread it every year at Christmas because that's when the book is set. And I remember when I was about 21, I did my annual reread, and suddenly I thought to myself, Holden is an idiot. This guy has no idea how the world works. He's wrong about pretty much everything. And then I had an existential crisis because I thought to myself, did I grow up or did I sell out and become one of the phonies that Holden hates? And I eventually came to decide that I grew up. And when you grow up, you understand that Holden is wrong about a lot of those things, and that's okay. So I will always love the book for how much it gave me an outlet to express a lot of those things that I was feeling and how much I felt. It was important for me at that age to feel understood, and I felt understood. But this is also why I think it's important for publishing to be diverse, because I know it meant a lot to me to be understood and to feel like I was being seen at that age. And I hope other people who were not white male teenagers found books that gave them the same experience. And The Catcher in the Rye is the one that did it for me, for better or worse. I understand there are a lot of people who don't like that book, and I get why. For me, it really worked. And then the third book is Maurice by E.M. Forster. I mentioned that E.M. Forster is my favorite author, at least at the moment. And so in my mid-20s, I was finally starting to get around to the idea of coming out of the closet. And as I am wont to do, I wanted to do some research. So I started reading classic books that had gay characters or were by gay authors, and they were all horrifically depressing. Because traditionally, you could not just have a book about a gay character. They had to be punished in the end. Otherwise, the book couldn't be published. So Maurice completely rejects that notion. It refused to condemn Maurice for being gay. It refused to say that he was destined to be unhappy because of who he is. And for that reason, it could not be published until after E.M. Forster was dead. It was finally published in 1972, and it was exactly the book that I needed at the time I read it. It gave me the courage to say, you know what, this is who I am. I'm going to have the life that I want, and go for it. And it worked out. So, you know, that book will always be meaningful to me. I recognize it's not a perfect book, but it will always be meaningful to me for that. And for similar reasons, I was devastated when David Bowie died, because I also did a lot of listening to the song Rebel Rebel at the time I was thinking of coming out. And it kind of, like what I mentioned, it meant a lot as a teenager to feel understood and to feel seen. I would listen to Rebel Rebel and I would read Maurice, and I felt seen and I felt encouraged. And for that reason, Maurice and all three of these books will always be meaningful to me. So there you go. That is the Meet the BookTuber tag. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to do my usual cop-out. You know what? I'm not even going to call it a cop-out. I'm not going to tag anybody. I'm just going to say, if you want to do it, do it. I wasn't tagged, and I'm doing it. So, you know, hey. But I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, I really appreciate your time in following along on this. I hope you enjoyed this, maybe learned a little bit about me. I know some of these stories have been repeated, but I never assume that anybody watches all of my videos. So hopefully it was worth your time. And of course, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.